Hey guys, good to be back with you again. As you may know, if you have been watching the videos or if you've been reading some of the things I've written, a while ago, a couple of years ago, what year is it now? 2023. So about 6-7 years ago, I did a replay of the 1900 National League season using Skeetersoft. This was not one that I recorded at all, although if you sort of look around on the Skeetersoft forums, you might be able to find it. You have to go kind of far back, though, because it was years ago that I did it. I did a whole bunch of research while I did the replay of that season, and I learned a lot of interesting things from old newspapers, which has been sort of a theme with some of the videos that I've had here lately, a number of things that I recall from doing back then. And so I thought there was one that we would look into here today. So sort of as a preface for this, like, I've been reading a few things lately, some stuff that's interesting from different people who talk about trying to make more so-called livable cities, who complain about the disaster that automobile world has been on cities or whatever, things like that. I mean, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but there can be times where public transit or streetcars or things like that don't necessarily work in your favor. So we'll go take a look over here at the screen. This is the 1900 St. Louis Cardinals. We'll make this just a little bit bigger here for you. The schedule of the 1900 Cardinals, a team you probably haven't thought about very much unless you're like me and you care about John McGraw and you play these seasons and stuff. Remember Louis Heilbronner, and it was probably McGraw who was actually manager of the team when Louis was brought on. Patsy Thibault and McGraw had kind of a grudge that went back a while, and the players liked McGraw better than Thibault. Real interesting thing, Thibault, of course, used to be the Cleveland Spiders manager, and now you know the rest of the story. So when we go down here, if you just look at this on Baseball Reference and you don't know what's going on, you're like, oh, there's nothing interesting here, right? There is. We're going to focus here a little bit on this period of time here where you see that we had only one game in the week here, and then we went back to the weekend. That's a little bit unusual, isn't it? Well, let's see if we can figure out exactly what was going on. I'll show you what was happening here. So here we go. We have... Fortune Smiled and Plucky Weihing. This is what 1900 papers look like. You can see it's just all text, and column, and you get kind of used to looking through this. Some of it's pretty good. Anyway, there's the game. It tells you right here, if you look close, attendance 900. Hopefully you can see that pretty clearly, this game at St. Louis. Notice here, by the way, in the box score that they decided to put St. Louis on top. That happens from time to time. I'm happy I'm not doing box score transcriptions because that can be really, really difficult. Remember that Retrosheet Baseball Reference didn't always exist. This is the interesting thing. Strike stops ball games. St. Louis Club says it cannot afford to open games to empty seats. On account of the prevalence of the streetcar strike, there will be no baseball game played at a league park tomorrow. Owing to the lack of transportation facilities, less than 400 people saw yesterday's game. That's interesting because they report here 900, but here they say less than 400 people saw the game. I don't know what the real number is. This, by the way, is from the St. Louis Republic, not the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The Republic had better coverage, at least in 1900, but that changes from time to time. As the salaries of gatekeepers, ticket takers, and other park attendants amount to over $100 each day, the management, which is... there we go. Strictly a business one. Considers it a bad proposition to play while the strike prevails. The Cincinnati game scheduled for today has been postponed, and it is not improbable that the game scheduled to take place between the St. Louis and Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Boston, and New York clubs this month will be, as far as possible, postponed to more advantageous dates. So it didn't happen, right? St. Louis did host Brooklyn and New York, and eventually Philadelphia and Boston. Apparently the paper forgot about that one. Did they do well? They did okay. It kind of came out even, sort of, and wound up like bouncing between fourth and fifth. So it is. But here we go. If this strike endures for 3 weeks, said Mr. Robinson, we will lose $15,000. Our expenses run to about $750 per day, and our prospective receipts also lost will be more than that. And then, Brooklyn, Boston, Philadelphia, New York were great attractions. I don't know so much about Boston. Boston won that replay I did in 1900, by the way. I'm not sure I fully understand why they seem a little bit overrated. And then McGraw, as you might recall, just came back to the team, right? And that was the other thing that St. Louis was really looking for. Anyway, interesting stuff, right? You're wondering, what is this streetcar strike stuff? Is anybody else talking about this? Here, I'll show you. All right, so we go back to page 1. And here you go. You have The bombardment of a streetcar by strikers. To the public, keep away from the crowd. Then you won't get hurt and you won't make trouble for the police. Keep your boys at home. Then they will be out of danger and they won't be the tools of mischief makers, right? This was pretty big. I mean, the entire first page is about the strike and has all sorts of interesting commentary here. There was a general strike inaugurated on the system at daybreak. No cars were in operation, and so on and so forth. That's what happened. And so because of this, the streetcars couldn't go far enough to take people from one location to another. And then that's when the damage started coming. Right. And you can, if you have your newspapers.com subscription, or if you have Sabre subscription, you can get this as well. Then you can go through and read this and read about the casualties of the day and all of this other stuff that happened. We're not going to read the whole thing. But what I'll show you here is that this was a pretty big story. I mean, today's news in brief here shows up on the second page. And there's a great drawing of this, actually pretty well done, I would say. Strikers and sympathizers endeavoring to persuade a motorman of a Compton Heights car to desert at 18th Street and Washington Avenue. Notice, by the way, that the streetcar is running right along the streets and that you're not seeing actual cars, right? 1900. Yeah, how St. Louis went home last night. They had a whole bunch of private cars and jumped on the ice wagon. I mean, really, really interesting stuff. It's a real interesting look into another world. There are a couple other things that we can look at first. I'll just show you one other paper. We'll look at the next day's paper. Suburban open transit system still is tied up, right? So the city system was still tied up. Second day of the strike, and this was huge because you couldn't get around to any place at all. The other one I wanted to show you really, really quick, because I know people will probably ask, is what did the Post-Dispatch say? Was it the Post-Dispatch then, or was it just called one or the other? We're about to find out. This was the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, so it already was that. And this is the Boer War, right, if you know your British history. But that was nothing compared to the scenes of the strike and all of the other stuff they talked about. I wish I weren't as thin as you. First time I've been on this wheel since 1896. And the vehicle owner says this is a cinch, right? He runs a cab. You can see there's poetry on the bottom, too. These newspapers are really, really cool. And then there's a little bit more information. Not quite as much, again, in the Post-Dispatch, which I find to be the inferior paper out of the ones that we have available. There are other St. Louis newspapers from 1908 that we can use, but I haven't taken the time this time to go through it. Or, I'm sorry, 1900, not 1908. Yeah, we all found humor in the strike situation and so on. Anyway, that's sort of the way that it was and the way that this stuff was covered. Pretty interesting stuff. Like I said, it's the St. Louis Republic that's probably the more interesting of the newspapers to look at. You can spend all sorts of time trying to read through this and trying to understand what happens. There is a website too somewhere that contains some information. Yeah, wow, the horse. And they said I was an extinct animal, right? And then this guy's charging fares to go up and down town. Anyway, the interesting stuff, because I can't think of very many other times in baseball history in which a streetcar strike was the reason why games were postponed. But here you have an example, and it's one that's forgotten by most people interested in baseball. Did a little bit of research here on where Robinson Field was, just to give us an idea of why they had to do this. Got its coordinates there from Wikipedia, and if we go over here to Google Maps, you can actually see it. So here's what St. Louis looks like, some of you are going to know the area better than me, but there is where Robinson Field was originally. I don't know much about the city. I've actually never been there, next to the fairgrounds, I suppose. So right here in this part of the city, really not too far from the riverfront, not too far from the Illinois border. I'm not quite sure what bridges existed back then in 1900. I don't know. Did a search as well for St. Louis in 1900, so we can take a quick look here. If it lets me. Oh, so you do see there is a bridge here. This is a map from 1900. I don't think that the part that includes... Oh, no, here it is. Yeah, fairgrounds. And there are the fairgrounds. Yes. So the park here on this map of the main portion of St. Louis, right, that I found on this Maps and Art site, shows this is where it was. They called it New Sportsman's Park. That's probably going to be a little bit small for you to see, and is not letting me zoom in, unfortunately. New Sportsman's Park was up here, and you can kind of get an idea of where the problem was, right? Because here's Union Station, here's your Central Depot. You have all sorts of people who are living down there. The city was already fairly built out, right? You've got to get people up here to so-called New Sportsman's Park, later called Robinson Field. And the other one that I found here, this map is not quite as good, but it gives you kind of an idea of how far built out this was. This is the map from 1900. This one we just looked at is actually from 1901, but it's basically the same thing. So it gives you sort of an idea of what they were dealing with and what exactly was going on. Pretty interesting stuff, at least as far as I'm concerned. I love going through history and going through a lot of this trivia and learning more about it. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff like this, especially in the early history of baseball, that you probably are not aware of, that gives you an idea of just how different things really were. And I mean, I know you're thinking, oh, of course it was different. It was 123 years ago, but yeah, it was only 123 years ago, right? I mean, this is old, but it's not like ancient history, right? It's not that old. And yet, things were just totally, totally different. So perhaps we should be a little bit more thankful for the invention of the automobile, because today, if you had a streetcar system, say in San Francisco, and it went on strike, you can still have a game. People still show up, right? Back then, they couldn't get there, and there wasn't much of a solution for them. Anyway, there you have it. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll talk with you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.